Okay, welcome to this webinar. I'm going to be talking about bad attitudes in kids, and I know this is a hard thing for many folks, many parents. I'd like to start by praying, and then we'll jump into some material here, okay? Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, this is a difficult subject for parents. It's not a trite thing. It's not something small. It's something big. And I know, Lord, that the folks on this particular webinar, many of them are hurting because they see their kids experiencing a bad attitude, and they know that's a sign of something big, something that needs to be addressed. So I pray that through this webinar, you would give wisdom to these parents. You'd give them guidance and understanding. And Lord, I pray that they'd be able to walk away from this experience, hearing something from you that you would be able to provide for them to reach their child's heart. So we're asking for your grace in the midst of all of this dialogue. I pray that you'd work with the technical elements here, that they would go well, and we'd be able to conduct this webinar without any technical difficulties. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put up a PowerPoint that's going to guide us through. Yes, and you can see my screen. Is that correct? Okay, I think we're good. I want to welcome in particular a couple groups of people to this webinar. Those, first of all, who are part of our Parent Training Center program. I know that there are a number of churches that are interested in helping disciple parents intentionally. And that's what our Parent Training Center program does. And so those of you who are part of the Parent Training Center program that are listening to this live or will hear it recorded, I just want to welcome you and thank you for being a part of the growing community of biblical parenting and developing that even in your own church. I also want to welcome those who are members. It's those people who financially support us $25 a month, for which we are very grateful, and those members have access to the whole webinar library. So if you are interested, those of you who are in there here aren't probably going to ask for listening to it later, but other people will email me and say, "Oh, I missed the webinar. How can I get into it?" And the answer to that is it's available to members in the webinar library, and that is where you can find access. So I just want to welcome you, members, and thank you so much for your financial support. It helps us do what we do, and we really appreciate that. I have three goals in this particular webinar. One, I'm going to dissect an attitude for you and help you understand what an attitude is. I'm also going to give you some proactive solutions for addressing attitudes in general. And then I want to give you some corrective solutions so that you can bring some solutions to bear in the midst of the problem. So proactive are things that we do when we're not having conflict or we're not seeing the attitude because we know it's there and we want to address it off-site or not in the moment. But the corrective solutions, we're trying to address them in the moment. I'm going to be referring to several resources. Those resources you can find in this link down below, biblicalparenting.org/webinar. That's where you'll find information about the next webinar. I'll be teaching and sharing some information about communicating well with teenagers in the next webinar on December 1, a Tuesday night at 9 p.m. And you'll find information about that at that location, as well as information about being a member or being a parent training center or having a live seminar or any of the resources that I'm going to talk about in the midst of this particular webinar. There are three areas where we often see bad attitudes. So I want you to think for a moment about your child. Maybe you have many children, but I want you to think about one child in particular, maybe the child that prompted you to be a part of this webinar. And I want you to ask a question: do you see the bad attitude in these areas? Because these are the most common areas where we see an attitude problem. One is when we give an instruction to a child that they don't want to do. When kids have ideas about what they want to do and then we interrupt them with an instruction, sometimes we then are the recipients of a bad attitude. Secondly, when we correct children, they often or sometimes they experience an attitude. And thirdly, when given a no answer, no, you can't watch a movie right now, no, we're not going outside right now, no, we're not going to have a snack right now. And in the midst of that, some children have no answer. Those three areas become primary arenas where we can work on this and troubleshoot some challenges. Now, some people might say, I have problems in all of those areas, and that's not uncommon. A child who has a challenge in the area of attitudes often needs some support and encouragement in one or more of those. So we'll start with one. I like to start with the first one, instructing children in areas they don't want to do, because it gives a concrete way to talk about it. It doesn't have to be as emotionally charged as when corrected or when given a no answer. So you want to think about it in those three areas. But then I also think there's another time in children's lives, or sometimes we see a problem when we have a generalized bad attitude, where we see the bad attitude just generally in everything that we see in life. And that's a little different problem, and I want to touch on that a little bit as well to give you some solutions as we move forward. Now, in order to do this, in order for you to understand effectively how to deal with attitudes, I want to explain some components of an attitude. I know it's very disheartening for parents, and I spent a lot of time preparing what I'm going to share with you here, knowing that parents would be on this webinar who are really suffering internally because of they know that something's going wrong in this child. This child's developing a hardened heart, or this child is developing a real animosity toward his brother or toward you as a parent, and that is really painful. And I'm praying that in the midst of this, God will be able to use the pain that's drawn you probably to this webinar to provide you with some new tools and resources that can help you to move forward in some strategic ways. So that's my prayer as I prepared this material. Let me share some things that I think will be helpful to you as you try to dissect this yourself and then think about your particular child and what that child needs. There are three things you want to think about, because I want to approach attitudes from a heart-based approach, not just dealing with behavior, but most importantly, dealing with the heart of a child. Attitudes do exist in the heart, and so we want to understand what that looks like from a heart-based approach. We even say that attitude is a window into a child's heart, so you don't want to ignore them. Some parents say, well, at least he's obeying. Or they excuse kids by saying, well, he's only 3, or he's only 13, or he's a boy, or whatever it is. Parents sometimes excuse what they see in children, and they're mainly looking at the behavior in those kids. And that behavior is a problem. But if we only look at behavior, we're not addressing the heart. So I want to take this a little bit deeper, because the other two components of an attitude are heart-related. The behavior is the thing you see. That's the rolling of the eyes or the huffing voice. That's the glare or the sarcastic remark or the angry response whenever you ask your son or daughter to do something. That pattern, think in terms of pattern. An attitude is a pattern. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking. And when a child starts to develop a pattern, you want to be on top of that. You want to try to address that, because the pattern, kids don't often grow out of those patterns. They grow into them. And so we have to address them significantly. But in order to do that, we can't just look at the behavior. We can't just say, stop having a bad attitude and refer to that glaring or that yelling or whatever the child's doing. We have to go deeper into the child's heart to understand that. And I would suggest that the deeper means we're going to deal with emotions, because all attitudes have at their base an emotional drive to them. So there's some emotion that's going on. Usually, or often, let me put it this way, often it's the emotion of disappointment. The child's disappointed with what they're seeing or what's happening, and so they respond with an attitude. So emotions exist in the heart. When Jesus was talking to the disciples, he says, do not let your hearts be troubled, do not be afraid. He's just illustrating that emotions exist in the heart. We say, I love you with all my heart. It's a sense where emotions reside inside the heart of a person. The other thing that's important to understand about an attitude is that bad attitudes have at their core a misbelief of some kind. And children often believe strange things about life. They believe that chores are ways that parents torture their kids. Or they believe that chores are mom's work. Or kids believe that homework is a waste of time. Or if I feel annoyed, I have the right to communicate to others with an attitude jab. And so they're poking at other people if they're not happy with what's going on. Just think for a moment, and you might even put in the comments an attitude or a belief that your child has. We may look at those in a little bit. So if you, in the question answer part, you can ask a question. You can put all kinds of comments. You don't have to just ask a question there. But if there's a belief that you're sensing your child has, we want to address that belief. Now, the emotions and beliefs exist in the heart. Romans 10:9 and 10 says, if you say with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you'll be saved. So we know that beliefs, according to that verse, exist in the heart. That's very important. Because if we're at the core of an attitude, we have to change what children believe. How do you change what children believe? That's going to be a primary way that we're going to address attitudes, because children who believe that they have the right to display their misery when they're disappointed with something have a false belief. That's not a right. That's a mistaken way of thinking about life. There's a lot of people who complain about life and have a bad attitude because they believe that they have the right to complain, and they don't. We have a responsibility to edify, not to tear down. And kids don't have that belief many times, so they have to learn it. I'm going to give you some solutions now that will help you address attitudes in ways that will help kids address their core beliefs, their emotions, and so on. Now, the first kind of solutions I want to give you are proactive solutions. These are things, ways you're going to arrange your family, or things you're going to do outside of the confrontation times. When I say proactive, I mean not during correction, not when you're seeing it happening, but you're going to try to deal with it at other times. I'm going to give you some ideas here because I think there are some core things that we can do in family life that will increase a child's ability to deal with the challenges of life, and they won't have to rely on attitude to communicate their displeasure. That's basically what an attitude does. An attitude is a mindset and then a display of displeasure or a display of emotion that's on the inside. And there's ways that we can address this, but let's talk about some proactive solutions first. One, I think you want to do some teaching and some talking about emotions. When kids understand more about emotions, they are often more able to manage them and communicate them effectively. I often suggest that kids have that they're emotionally illiterate. They don't have the ability to address their emotions carefully and wisely. They need to learn how to process them. So I would suggest that you might not get out of your child what the emotion is. So you have to impute that emotion sometimes by saying something like, it looks like you're disappointed and you're communicating to me with that glare because I'm telling you no about something. Or it appears to me that you're unhappy that I'm asking you to get off the iPad so you can help me set the table. And because you're unhappy, you're giving me this kind of communication. So what we're doing is we're communicating the emotion to the child to raise the emotional vocabulary of the child. And we want to talk about that a little bit more. You know, in reality, it's not the emotion that's the problem. It's the display of that emotion that often creates the sin that a child commits. So it's not wrong to feel angry or disappointed. But if you take it out on people or you hurt other people, then that is a problem. You might even empathize with a child by saying, I can understand you're disappointed that you can't go to the soccer game because it's raining, but that's no reason to throw your shoes across the room. What we're doing is we're teaching our kids there's a difference between the emotion they experience and the display of it. The display of emotion with a bad attitude is inappropriate, it's immature, and it will hinder a child's ability to move forward in life. So talk about emotions and explore them with kids and address them and help them understand what's going on at an emotional level. You'll be addressing this on a heart work level that'll help you to be more effective with them. The second thing is you want to try to address belief errors. Now, this isn't a corrective solution. That is, you want to deal with the belief error on the spot usually, but you want to log it away when you see an attitude. You know, he must believe that work should be avoided at all costs. He must believe that the trash, he can just step over the trash and leave it for somebody else. It's somebody else's job. What are the beliefs that a child has that lead them to have an attitude? because we want to raise the awareness level of that belief for a child so that they can get it and they can understand it. Beliefs are changed in a number of different ways, and I'm going to give you some corrective ways that we're going to change what a child believes. There's lots of different ways to change that. One of the things you must keep in mind, I think, is that the scriptures are a key tool for changing what children believe. After all, Hebrews 4:12 says that the scriptures, the Word of God, is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword, penetrating to separate the bone and marrow, and penetrating the thoughts and the attitudes of the heart. So God's Word has this way of affecting how we think and how we act and how we respond. Just this evening, I was counseling with a family, and Dad told me he's doing a great job with his 9-year-old son. And he's correcting his son on the spot sometimes. And he says to his son, I'm going to, look, can you handle this, or do we need to take you offline for a little bit? I really like that idea. Do you need to get offline here so you can settle down, change your heart, come back and see me when you're ready? That idea of taking a child offline means they're not engaged in life for a little bit. They need to settle down before they're ready to come back. And sometimes we'll do that. That's more of a corrective solution. I'll come back to that. But what he's trying to help his son understand is that the decisions he's making every day about his attitude are very important, and they affect the things that are going on in life now. So responsibility and privilege go together, for example, is what he's teaching him. He's teaching him all kinds of things that are very good things about beliefs, because we're feeding and helping this child understand in his heart these very important beliefs. That's why Psalm 119:11 says, I will hide God's word in my heart so I won't sin against you. Please don't use the Bible in a way that overemphasizes the holiness and wrath and justice of God, especially during correction. It gives a child a false impression of God as Father. Remember, Jesus Christ died to satisfy the wrath and the holiness and justice of God so that we can enjoy God as Father. And to understand the Holy Spirit is empowering us to move forward is important. Anytime we can use stories from God's Word to help kids understand key elements and principles, good things can happen. So look for ways to address belief errors in a child's heart, and that will help you significantly change some of the attitudes that you see. Just even raising the awareness level of them often can do that. Let's go to a third proactive solution, and that has to do with build more relationship. You just can't build enough relationship with kids. And so if you're having trouble with a attitude issue, maybe it's an indication that we need to just add more relationship. I'm not saying lack of relationship is the cause. Maybe it is, but often more relationship helps no matter what the cause is. And so spending time with that child and filling that child's emotional tank and helping that child experience you in closeness, whether it's playing or talking or shopping or going out for coffee or cooperating on something or whatever it might be. Building relationship is often a key element to overcome some of the attitude issues and really set the stage for maybe some of the corrective solutions that we're going to share here in a moment. So what I've shared with you so far is a number of proactive solutions. Don't miss those. I know sometimes parents like to move to correction really quickly. Remember that much of the work you're going to do as you're trying to help children change is more than just helping kids adjust what they are dealing with in the moment. Sometimes we have to step back and do some proactive work to help our children change. Probably that's going to be the most significant work you do, is in the proactive department. But sometimes it's right in your face and you got to deal with it in the moment. So I've got a whole bunch of ideas for you that, and when I get to the last one, you might take a screenshot of it just because I'm going to give you a bunch of them just so you can capture these together if you don't get to write them down fast enough. And when we come to corrective solutions, one idea I like to use with kids is observe and run. In other words, this is a non-confrontive approach which gives a child feedback about their attitude. So let's imagine that a child has a mean attitude whenever his brother walks in the room, or an arrogant attitude, is always putting down his brother. And you're trying to address that. You may use a number of strategies to address that problem, but one might be an observe and run technique, which basically says you're walking through the kitchen, you say, you know, that was unkind, and you keep going. You don't wait for a dialogue. Your child may not say anything, like be shocked by you walking through or he may want to have the last word. You do not have to have the last word. You're just making an observation and moving out because he will think about what you said. And so often the observe and run technique helps to raise the awareness level for a child. And that's a key element many times because many kids don't realize it. That's going to be part of the second technique here, or the second solution in a moment. But making an observation is good and often will give children enough feedback, and it may start to influence them. The interesting thing about a heart-based approach is we don't know exactly what solution is going to reach that child's heart. So by giving you a number of them, you can try different ones. I find that many parents, I was actually looking online about bad attitudes today just to see what's being said out there. It's amazing how much of the advice, just type in there, how do I deal with a bad attitude? And look at the comments that people are making to help people with solutions. Take all their privileges away. Is a common one. He doesn't get anything until his attitude changes, and it's all about consequences. I believe consequences are valuable, and you might find consequences help, but you're likely here in this webinar because you've tried some of that approach and it's really not working. You need some other ways, and really we're going to do some end runs here. We're going to circumvent some of the resistance that children put up to get around the outside and reach that child on a heart level. And I think if you try some of these things, you may see some glimmer of hope. You may see some progress, and you might be able to start moving toward a better attitude in the life of your child. Just remember, the goal isn't justice. The goal is a changed heart. We'll come back to that in a minute. Here's another corrective solution. Slow down the process. Sometimes this moves pretty fast. You say one thing to your child, and he argues with you he's got an attitude right away. You might just pause and look at him. You don't have to say anything for a moment. Then you might say, wow, it looks like you are disappointed with me asking you to get off the iPad. And so you're communicating that with sarcasm or with anger. Would you like to talk about that a little bit? It sounds like we have a problem that you'd like to discuss. You want to bring that up now? You see what I'm doing? I'm really slowing down the process to raise the awareness level that there's a problem, instead of escalating with intensity. If you start speaking more quickly and more loudly and leaning over the child and pointing your finger, you're likely not going to make an end run and get to the heart. You may overpower a child, and the child might comply, but you may not deal with the root issues of the bad attitude, whereas if you can slow down the process, take it from, kids are often throwing things under the table to jabs. Bring them up on top, and that may help to raise the awareness level. I was in a counseling situation, family counseling, and a 15-year-old girl was there. Mom said, I wish that my daughter, 15, I wish that she wouldn't sigh whenever I give her an instruction. She perks up and she says, what? That's me having self-control. See, she had no idea. It was her impression that she was being self-controlled by sighing, and you definitely would not want to see what I would do if I wasn't sighing. That was her attitude. And so as we went around and talked about this, we raised the awareness level for her so that she could see that her sighs were creating tension in the room. That's what we're doing here by slowing down the process and talking about things. I mean, you're trying to get things done. I'm trying to get the trash out, and I'm asking you to take out the trash, and your child starts giving you an attitude, and you slow down the process because in this moment, maybe getting the trash out isn't the most important thing. Maybe the most important thing is addressing the attitude that we see. I put here build relationship more. I think that's an important one. We've talked about that as a proactive solution, but you might consider that here as well in the corrective solutions. Firmness, I'm an advocate of firmness. So sometimes we say to a child, all right, fine, don't take out the trash. You need to sit down on the step there until you're ready to show me that you can follow instructions with a good attitude, then we're done. Your life stops until you're ready to work with me. So I'm an advocate of firmness. I think firmness is really important. I'm going to give you some more ideas here besides firmness, but I think you'll find that it's a helpful way to work with children. It's not the only way. So if this has been your favorite way of moving forward, then you might want to try one of the other things. But if you haven't been using firmness, you might want to emphasize that a little bit, because sometimes it's firmness that says we aren't going to live this way anymore. You need to make a change. And I'm not going to argue with you about it. I'm done. I love you too much to argue with you about it, so you need to have a seat, and we're going to deal with it in a different way. So that's another approach. Another one is questioning, to pause or even come back later after the trash has been taken out and say, you know, I got a question for you. I'm trying to figure out what emotion's driving you to have that attitude with me. I'm trying to figure out what that is, because I know you're trying to communicate something, and I'm trying to figure out what you're trying to communicate. So asking questions can often be a way to help children start analyzing their own hearts and come to a conclusion that this attitude that they have is a challenge that needs to be addressed. Another solution on the corrective side is a partnership or teamwork attitude approach. So we're saying, hey, come on, would you work with me? Let's work together. I've never raised Billy before. I need all the help I can get. So can you talk to me? Give me some ideas. And I'm expecting, you know, I still have to give instructions. I'm the mom or I'm the dad. It's part of my job. But I want to do it in the best way, and I expect you to respond to me. Can we work together here so we can have a close relationship? So the teamwork approach might be helpful moving forward. Another approach is the moral approach. Son, I want you to know that what you're doing is wrong. There are two things going on here. One is you're unhappy about something, and that probably needs some adjustment in your heart, because your expectations of not being interrupted while you're on the iPad when there's things to do around here or homework to get done are probably unrealistic. So that's one problem. But then you're communicating your displeasure in a way that's hurtful to me. That's wrong. So maybe with some kids, the moral approach would be helpful as you're trying to adjust an attitude. Another one is the bullying approach. You see, when a child's being abusive with a bad attitude by yelling at you or by using sarcasm or arguing with you, you can say, look, I feel like you're attacking me. I feel like you're poking me. And I just feel like you're bullying me. I just don't think that's appropriate. And bullying, of course, in the last several years has taken on a primary or a role, and it's very prominent in schools today and so on. So when you talk about bullying that way, kids know what it is, and maybe that might be a way to reach a child's heart. Another one is I like the training approach. The training approach is an approach that says, we're not just going to focus on what we're not going to do, stop arguing with me or stop having this problem. Now we're going to work on what we need to do instead. And we're going to focus on where we need to go. And so we might, in that case, say, look, here's what we need to work on. We're going to work on the concept of honor. Okay, you need to be honoring me. I'm trying to honor you. And an attitude isn't honoring. And so we're going to practice honor. In fact, before you're free to go and do something else, you need to think of 3 honoring things you could do for the family. They can be individuals or the family itself. You can clean something up. You can be kind to someone. I want to know what those 3 things are. Now do you see, when I say training, we're focusing on where we need to go instead of where we are right now. And I find this to be very helpful in most situations when we're dealing with bad attitudes, because many times parents are saying, stop it, cut it out. I can't believe you're doing that again. They're focusing on the negative, what the child needs to stop. What I'm saying here is let's focus on where the child needs to go, and we may get a little bit further. You don't want to be walking around on eggshells with kids with bad attitude. Don't be afraid to step in there with some firmness. You may need to use some compassion and caring and asking questions, but training is often going to be a key component that you're going to use as you're moving forward. Okay, that's the last one on that slide, so if you want to take a screenshot of that, I'll let you do that. Before I go to the last slide I want to share with you, because I want you to remember some key elements here that will guide your overall parenting as you approach the challenging issue of a bad attitude in the life of a child. You've got to remember, and I'll get to those 3 things in a minute, but realize that sometimes kids have a problem because there's something going on. You know, maybe they have some resident anger because parents are getting a divorce, or because of some other problem that's going on that they don't appreciate. So we want to help our kids catch this and grab it. Okay, let's go to this last slide. I want you to remember these key issues as you move forward that'll govern your thinking as a parent. One is that attitudes are a heart issue, not just behavior. You're trying to reach a child's heart, and getting to a child's heart is strategic. So you never know which way is going to go. I work with kids all the time in counseling, counseled 6 families yesterday, 2 or 3 today, I don't remember. But just working with families, and it's surprising to me which of the ideas get there. So you want to just be sensitive to the Lord, allow the Lord to speak to you, and allow Him to guide you to reach a child on a heart level. Think heart, don't just think behavior. A second thing is you don't want to take it personally. Don't take it personally. I know it's hard when your child's attacking you or criticizing you or yelling at you, but you have to realize this is a child's problem. Keep it the child's problem. When you keep it the child's problem, then you're able to work on it as the child's attitude issue. So be careful about taking it personally. It's just going to ruin your ability to move forward. You got to essentially shut your brain off for a little, as far as emotions are concerned, if you're having a problem here with your child, so you don't get sucked in. Don't take it personally. And thirdly, focus on the positive attitude that should replace it. What does it look like to move in the right direction? And that's going to help you a lot. Just one more thought. I probably should have put it here. I just remember this as we're talking. Don't focus on justice. You did this, so you deserve this. When you're correcting children, focus on training and moving forward. That'll help you a lot. So that's a fourth one there that I should have put, but I didn't. Before I'm going to let you ask me some questions now about attitude, and I have some questions here as well that people have asked. So we'll do that in just a moment. So you can be thinking of those, or go ahead and put them up on the screen. But let me just share with you where I'm getting some of the ideas that I'm sharing with you. This slide here is an overview of our curriculum. We have 8 lines of curriculum, and the ones I'm going to point out to you are number 5, which is at the bottom, the anger material, number 6, which is the honor material, and number 1, which is the parenting is hard work material. Let me just show you those. And all of these are on that webinar page down at the bottom of this slide at biblicalparenting.org/webinar. You can find links to these in case you're interested in moving forward. I would suggest that we want to address the emotion behind the attitude in the Good and Angry book, and the whole issue of anger will help you do that. This is an angry special that we have. And there's a little booklet you can have using a team approach to deal with anger in your family. All of this is helping you get behind the attitude and is often a very constructive way to address it. There's a chapter in the Good and Angry book about attitude specifically that can help you move forward. The next material, I find that our children often need to focus on where they need to go instead of where they are. And this material, the honor material, really helps do that. The name of the book is Say Goodbye to Whining, Complaining, and Bad Attitudes in You and Your Kids. The title does have the word attitude in it, but I would suggest it's more about the biblical concept of honor. And that's why the children's program is called the Kids Honor Club for ages 3 to 12. So if that interests you, you can take a look at that as well. And then the third one is the Parenting is Hard Work book, and particularly the training manual. The Parenting is Hard Work training manual with 8 audio CDs. There's a chapter starting at page 157. You can open that book, and it'll guide you through some strategies for addressing bad attitudes in children, and that will help you a little bit as well. And it really gives you practice sessions in that book, so you can practice in some particular ways. Okay, went a little over more than I wanted to, but I want to now allow you to ask me some questions. So let me stop the sharing and see what we have in the question and answer time. So Sarah's asking the question, what was the 4th truth to remember? Oh, the one I just said. Oh, okay, good. And that is, don't think about a justice mentality when you're trying to correct. You did this, so I need to punish you now. Remember, the goal is a changed heart. And so I think the justice mentality can get in the way of some of the work that we're working on with us, okay? Yes, Ed, I see the question in this box. But you were raising your hand earlier, and I didn't know what to do with that, just so you know. Okay, someone asked this. How does this play out with adopted children? My daughter is 5.5, closer to 3 with delays, which is common with adopted kids, and she gets a very bad attitude when she doesn't get her way. It has been tough to get the heart change with her attitude. Is there something special to add? All right, I'm going to share my screen again with you, and I want to show you, let's see. I work with adopted children a lot. You know that I have adopted children myself, And so this is our home page, and I'm going to go to the very bottom of the home page, and I'm going to click on this link that says adoption. So I want to just linger there for a moment so you can see it's at the bottom of the home page, and that link is going to take us to a page about adoption. And so I talk about adoption here in the beginning because I work with a lot of adopted kids, and you have to realize I believe every child who's adopted experiences heart damage because the person who's raising them is different than the person who bore them, even if they're adopted as infants. Now, sometimes all they need is a godly, loving home, and healing takes place. It's beautiful when that takes place, and that's what sometimes all God needs for healing to take place. But I find that many kids need more than that. Now, ask yourself this question, okay? You have a 5-year-old already. Where do you see some of the tendencies, let's say, some of the side effects of the adoption process? Where do you see them? I would say that most of us are going to see it right here in Material Addressed in the Motivate Your Child book, which has to do with the conscience. The conscience is the place where that I think gets damaged in the bonding process, the rebonding process, and it's a challenge. So dealing with the conscience is important, and then the action plan helps you go from one to the other. I'm just going to let you look at this some more, but I'll just go all the way to the bottom here. We have an adoption package these are the books I use when I work with families who are adopted. You can start with any one of these, but you're going to use them all because, like I said already, this honor material is moving you where you need to be, so you're getting out of the selfishness that some of these kids have. The Parenting's Hard Work is the training manual, rebuilding the heart one piece at a time. And the action plan book gives you this plan to move from point A to point B in any area. And the Motivate Your Child book deals with the conscience. So this is rich for adopted children, and I would suggest you're going to deal with attitudes on a deeper level with children who are adopted, and you might find that particularly helpful. Okay, let's go back now, and give me just a second to get through the questions here. Okay, I think I'm to the next one. First of all, Mandy says she has a child who's adopted as well and seems to think most things are a huge injustice, which she has truly had a lot of in her life, even if they are everyday happenings. Okay, so injustice implies victim mentality. So she believes, so I went to your question because it's still on this adoption idea. Adoption is a real challenge for many of our kids because they have experienced pain, and because they don't know how to process guilt properly many times, or they don't know how to do in the conscience to do the right thing part, they often view themselves as victims of life situations, and so they view everything as being unfair. So you'll see those kids use that word, it's unfair, it's not fair, he gets more than I do, and so on. And that's a real challenge. And those kids need to learn some different things about life because a lot of life is unfair, and sometimes they're perceiving unfairness when it isn't unfair, but it's not meeting their expectations. And so we need to help them understand how to address that more completely. And that's, to a great extent, going to come through this training of the perception of life and how we're going to address that perception of life. And attitude it's a great place to start. So working through the Say Goodbye to Whining, Complaining, and Bad Attitudes in You and Your Kids book is about honor and gives children a different perspective on life. That's what I like about that material. It's very positive and upbeat, and it's moving kids along in a way that's going to help them greatly. So I would encourage you, Mandy, to continue on in that same way about dealing with adoption. Now I'm going to go to your question that you started with, because I'm jumping around. I just recognize your name again. My 10-year-old seems to think that everything is an injustice and immediately responds to any no or correction with an argument. What is the best way to address the constant arguments? All right, good. I should do a webinar just on kids who argue. It's such a common problem. But let me give you a couple ideas. One, don't engage. Don't get involved in the argument. When you see the argument coming on, some dialogue can be appropriate, but you'll know when it's crossed the line. And that's the key thing. Identify the line, and when you feel like the line is being crossed, this is the line of abuse, where you feel like she's valuing her issue more than her relationship with you, then she's mistreating you, and she's crossed the line. When she's crossed the line, your response needs to be, stop. I'm not going to argue with you. Would you like a do-over here? So I like giving do-overs because they're gray space. Would you like a do-over? Or do I need to go to some discipline here? Or maybe you need to take a break and change your heart and come back and see me. But don't go down the path of arguing, because when you start following the child's path of arguing, they just keep going. They don't really want the answers that you provide. They want to get out of the work, or they want what they can't get with the no answer, as you mentioned. So be careful about going down the path. Stop the process. Draw attention to the line through some teaching and proactive teaching. That'll go a long way. And then you want to always, when you're dealing with arguing, provide, or anything we're dealing in parenting, don't just talk about what you want to stop. I know you want to stop the arguing, but what do you want to replace the arguing with? And I would suggest that a study of graciousness would be helpful. Gracious is a combination of gentleness, self-control, and patience. Okay, you take those three qualities, which all happen to be part of the fruit of the Spirit, by the way. So graciousness is gentleness, patience, and self-control. You put those three things together, and then a person is able to manage themselves. Now, when we come to arguing, then of course the graciousness is viewed more as a self-control strategy here to be able to move forward. But it's also gentle, it's more kind. All of that's in the fruit of the Spirit. All I'm saying is that it's a supernatural thing that God will work in us if we allow him to. And I think that's good not only for kids, but of course we as adults need graciousness too, even as we work with our children, without losing our firmness. I think we can be firm and gracious at the same time. And so you want to address, I would say arguing's a problem. It's a problem when it crosses the line. So you want to address that in a clear way, using firmness, but also addressing it with these other things that we talked about. Okay, someone else, anonymous person, says this. How soon would you expect to see results in changing the heart of an elementary age child? Yeah, it's a good question. I would suggest that it really depends. Sometimes I see children change really quickly. The 9-year-old boy I was working with tonight, the parents brought him to me because he was lying, and he has a hard time with lying. But you know, here's a boy, I'm convinced in the last 2 weeks, he's made significant spiritual strides in his life. And it was one of the few kids, when he comes into my office, he's 9 years old, he brings a clipboard, and he takes notes when I'm talking to him. He writes down the things I say and the scriptures that I share with him. And I know that, and his dad's doing some great work with him. And so he will grow rather quickly. There are other children that I find are more self-focused, I would say. It's harder for them to see outside of their own world, and it takes a lot more work to penetrate the heart of that child. So I would say this. If you are working on some miscellaneous things and you're not getting the progress you want, then I would suggest what you want is a systematic and intentional work for 40 days. Now, that work you're going to do to develop a plan, a strategy, is going to happen in the book, the Motivate Your Child Action Plan, that's on the webinar response page that you can find. The action plan has 12 audio sessions, 12 chapters. It actually helps you carve out 12 meetings that you'll have with your child. We're talking about dealing with some significant patterns. By the way, when we're talking about attitudes, think in terms of patterns. Okay, if your child has a pattern in a particular way, that's a heart response. A pattern inside the heart we want to break down. So that's what you're looking for. We want to make changes. How long does it take a heart to change? I don't know. God's still changing my heart. I got a long way to go, and I'm 58 years old. I say I'm going to retire soon. 42 more years, I'll retire, and so I got to be working hard on my heart to grow so that I'm ready to retire. But I think changing a heart takes a lifetime. And what we're trying to do now is try to address some pieces of the heart as we can, as we're working with these children, as long as we have them. So I would suggest use some of these things, work on them. If you're not seeing change using the few things I've shared here, you're going to want an in-depth plan use the Motivate Your Child Action Plan book. I think every parent should have that book because it really takes the sanctification process that God uses with us and help parents know how to help their children change using a God-based strategy. I'm not saying everything in there is tying into the Bible and spirituality, but it's the strategy itself of the 5 words and moving from point A to point B is all about how sanctification takes place in our lives. Okay, so Eric asked the question, how do I reply to, why do you keep judging me or putting me down when bringing bad behavior to their attention? All right, so here's a child who is coping with the inadequacies that are being presented, or the correction that needs to take place, with a defensiveness that's saying, why do you keep judging me? And can I assume this child might be a little bit older, maybe a teenager? I'm going to assume that. It helps me to know how old the child is when you give me a question, but I'm going to assume we've got an older child that's saying, why do you keep judging me or putting me down? Okay, Eric says almost 13. Okay, great. So we're dealing with an adolescent in that first stage of adolescence. Here's a child who does not know how to process guilt properly, does not know how to process mistakes, doesn't know how to process weaknesses in his life. We're going to need to zero in on that particular area of his life or her life in order to move that child in the right direction. That's what we want to do. Now, how are we going to do that? Boy, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. This is, again, part of the conscience, and the material you're going to look at is in the Motivate Your Child book. I'll try to summarize. There's the conscience, okay? There's 4 parts of the conscience, and one of the parts of the conscience is dealing with wrong. So I'm zeroing into that chapter, but the whole discussion of the conscience would be really helpful for you, because here's a child who doesn't like the bad feeling of being corrected. And so what are you going to do about that? I would suggest, as I do in the book, in Proverbs 6:23, it says that the corrections of discipline are the way to life. Does that say correction's good or bad, I say to kids? Well, it says it's good. That's right. Most people don't view correction as good. They view correction as bad. Oh, I'm not good. And so I say to kids, can I tell you the stupid verse in the Bible? And their eyes get big because I use the word stupid, because most kids I work with, their kids and parents don't use the word stupid, and it's not a word allowed in their family, but the Bible uses the word. So I say, look at here, open my Bible to Proverbs 12:1, where it says, he who loves knowledge loves discipline, but he who hates correction is stupid. Wow. Here's what I say to kids. Does it say there that the person who's corrected is stupid? No, that's not what it says. It says the person who hates correction is stupid. Why? Because correction helps us grow. It helps us move forward. God has designed for you, I would say to your 13-year-old, lots of different ways for you to learn. You can learn from your teacher. You can learn from your mother or father. Or maybe that's the same thing. Maybe your mother is your teacher. You can learn from a book. You might even learn from Google. But one of the ways God has designed for us to learn is through the process of correction. And so that process is so important, to learn how to respond well to correction. And every time I correct you, I'm giving you a gift. So from now on, when I correct you, I'm going to say, son, I'm going to give you a gift. Can you come over and get ready? You want to change his attitude toward correction. That's really what we're dealing with here. He has a mindset or an attitude toward correction that's improper, unhealthy, ineffective, and you're trying to address that with him. And so his defensiveness says, why do you keep judging me? Say, I'm not judging you. Look, if you see me doing the wrong thing, you can correct me if you do it in a respectful way. We all need correction sometimes, and I appreciate it when someone corrects me. You know, if I got my shirt collar up and I walk out of the house, I hope you'll tell me, Dad, your shirt collar's up, so that I can correct that so I don't look stupid. I don't want to hate correction. I want to value it. I want to make it something that I can use in my life and use it well. Okay, let's go on to another question here. I don't know if I'm going to get to all these questions. Man, a lot. Lexi says, I have a child that is best described as intense. She's a perfectionist and is very emotional, as well as extremely negative in all situations. She also is very poor self-awareness of her own emotions, how can I help her overcome this negative mindset that colors her daily attitude? How can I help her become more aware of her own emotions, how they impact her and how they impact others? That reminds me of here's another question. I'm going to read it because it ties in for this other person as well. What can we do to help our son develop a more positive outlook on life? He complains about everything and seldom seems happy. His negative attitude is affecting his schoolwork, and I'm sure it's hurting his ability to make friends as well. Here's another one similar to that. My daughter seems to react whenever I tell her to do something. Her attitude is one of resistance, says, we're having what for dinner? Ick. I have to practice the piano now? I hate piano. I don't want to do homework. I can't stand homework. Okay, so what we're seeing now is an attitude that's not focused in one particular area. It's a generalized attitude about life. And that is a significant problem in the life of a child that needs to be addressed. So we're going to do this on several different levels. You can't just come in and say, look, you have a problem, I'm going to straighten you out. Remember, our goal is to kind of do an end run here, to get to the heart. Sometimes we can go directly in and kids respond, okay, I'll change. But many times we have to do this end run to get there, and that's going to require some wisdom, I think, to make that happen. And so I'm going to go back to my 12 meetings that I think we have with kids when we're helping them change and move forward. These meetings are spontaneous meetings sometimes, but other times they're sit-down meetings, and we're going to talk about how we're going to make this work. But meeting number one is typically this. It's an awareness meeting that happens either formally or spontaneously that says, son, I've noticed something in you that I'm thinking about, and that is it seems like you often have a negative disposition toward life. I'm not sure what to do about that. Yeah, but I'm going to be praying about some ideas to bring to you so that it can help you, because I think this is going to be a problem for you. And that's it. We're done. Okay, it's just a short meeting that says, we've got a problem here, and I'm thinking about it. But over the next couple days, you're going to be saying, oh, there it is again. There's that negative attitude. I'm thinking about some solutions for you there, son. So meeting number one is just to start raising the awareness level. I find it fascinating that many kids don't realize they have a problem, or they're not acknowledging they have a problem, or they're surprised when we say they have a problem. So number one is just starting to raise the awareness level with these kids. And then we're going to start bringing some different steps into the process. This is coming out of that Motivate Your Child action plan. One of those is firmness. We're going to say, well, wrong response. That's a glass half empty response. And we may use that as an example. I'm going to give you a do-over there. Would you like a do-over, or do I need to go to some discipline? That's a very firm approach. Other times we're going to do some teaching approach. We're going to do a whole bunch of different things to try to reach this child on a heart level in order to help them make some adjustments in their hearts regarding the challenges that they're facing. So what we're suggesting here is that it's a multifaceted approach. Think broadly about how you're going to help a child, because this is not just some simple, has an bad attitude about a simple problem. This is something that's a little more deeply ingrained. It's a pattern. It's a generalized bad attitude about life, and challenging this child on a deeper level with some of these things we're talking about here would be great. But you may need a little bit more extra work, and that's why I suggest the action plan book if you'd like. Next question, how long does attitude change take? If we're working on something, should we change what we're doing after 2 weeks, a month? How long do you keep going with something before trying something else? How do you know if what you're doing is working? I really like the question, because sometimes I find parents try something, and then before it even has a chance to work, they're jumping to something else, trying that, and so they're fluttering around all these things when really sometimes things do need time to work. I like to give the illustration of the doctor and the broken leg. Does the doctor heal the broken leg? No. God heals the broken leg, but the doctor puts a cast on the leg and then uses time. Time is an important part of the training process, of the discipline process, of the correction process. I love to use time in the discipline process. How long does it take for an attitude to change? That's a hard one. Sometimes children are dealing with things that they'll be challenged with for a long time in their lives. Other times they come more quickly. I would suggest that we should see significant change in 40 days. That's the whole message of the action plan book. And using a multifaceted process for change is often what helps a child do that. I didn't realize I was going to be talking about the action plan book, so I didn't put it in the on the webinar page. But if you're interested in it, go to the adoption page, and you can click on it there, and you can find out information about it. But what I'm suggesting here is that we should see some change. We should see some progress even after we're raising the awareness level. We should see some movement taking place after a week or two. And so we're not necessarily changing what we're doing, but we're adding more pieces to the puzzle to try to adjust this. There's a lot of ways. Parenting isn't simple. And there's not just one quick solution here. I think that there's a lot of things that you can do. Part of it's a skill, and you're developing different tools and gathering them. We try to provide them for you. Others, it's an art where you're wisely choosing what you think is going to reach this child's heart while keeping yourself calm at the same time. So it's challenging. I would say hang in there. But if what you're doing isn't working, don't be afraid to try something else. It just reminds me of a dad I was working with yesterday. See if I can remember the story. He was something about, his child's experiencing anxiety, and so he's using firmness. I'm going to do a webinar on anxiety coming up sometime in the future. But you can use firmness, or you could use compassion. Either of those strategies work with anxiety in general, but he was using firmness, and so I suggested something on the compassion side. He says, I never thought of that. I think that might be a better approach than the firmness I'm using with my son. All I'm saying here is there's lots of good ways to reach children's hearts, and you might want to think of trying some other things or adding some other solutions to the process. It's not an easy thing that we do. Lisa says this: we have adopted our 11-year-old daughter through foster care. We also have 2, 8, 10, 12, and 13-year-olds, which I assume are biological. I'm afraid that our foster to adopt support group is focused on the diagnoses instead of leaning on God's word. That makes sense. Do you have any suggestions on how to explain to them that we need to stop making excuses and start addressing the issue and correct them? I'm loving the action plan and Motivate Your Child book. Okay, well, yes, all right. My heart just is, I have so much compassion for parents who adopt, so I want to say thank you for what you do. Christians do more adoption than any other group. Why? Because we have in our hearts the desire to give back. But you've got to realize these kids have lots of work that we need to help them with. And I believe that the best approach for working with children who are adopted is a multifaceted approach that it uses those materials I shared with you on the website. The conscience is a primary place where children are struggling, and I don't think that excusing kids because they're adopted is going to move them forward. I think many of these kids have tough lives, and we need to help them deal with it in a tough way. And as we do, then good things can happen. So I would suggest the Action Plan book and the Motivate Your Child book would be a great place to start if those are the ones you're attracted to. They're really going to help you move forward with a child who's adopted to go through the different things and move forward. Boy, lots of questions here. A lot of them I didn't get to answer, and I'm sorry about that. I hope that you found some solutions here that will help you to address attitudes. They're complex. They're not easy, and so if you just read online, how do I deal with a bad attitude, you're going to be disappointed by the solutions people are giving out there. It's disheartening for me to see what people are doing to their kids to try to change bad attitudes. Maybe it'll work on some kids, but I would say that many kids need a bigger approach. It's end runs instead of this direct, I'm going to take everything away from you until you change kind of an approach. I think consequences are good, but I think we got to change the heart. Remember, the goal isn't justice, it's a changed heart. So I would encourage you to think along those lines, and that will help you as you're moving forward with your kids. I want to thank you for your participation in this webinar. If you have ideas about a webinar, I want to give you my personal email address so that you can give me some feedback. I'd really like to know what I've said today that's been helpful. So here's a question you can ask. What did you learn? What was helpful? If you just shoot me an email, that would be encouragement to me, and it would help me as I'm moving forward and thinking about where we go from here in webinars. If you have an idea about a webinar, that'd be great. My next one's on communicating with teens. I've got some other ones lined up after the first of the year, and plenty more things to do. We're trying to build a culture of biblical parenting, and the webinars that we do are part of that. There's several other things we do. We have our blog, we have our Facebook page, We have our membership that you can be a part of this. And then parent training centers are at the center of that, where churches are out there discipling parents intentionally and systematically. I encourage you to get involved in any of those things that that interest you, and we'd love to be a part of that with you. Let me just pray for all of us again, okay? Lord, these parents love you. They want to do what's right, and sometimes children get stuck in some areas with attitude, and I pray, Lord, that you give these parents wisdom and guidance and the support that they need to challenge in wise ways the attitudes that their children face. Lord, I pray that you would work deeply in the kids' hearts so that they would develop an attitude that's as their heart faced toward you, serving you and loving you and doing those great things that happen when we give ourselves to you in that special way. So bless these families, every family that's listening to this, whether now or in the recorded sessions. We ask that you'd be honored in their lives. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much, folks, for joining me today.